I remember the night she told me about him. Her ex, the way her voice trembled, not because she still loved him, she said, but because he was sick alone and had no one else left. We were sitting at our usual spot, that small corner cafe that always smelled like roasted beans and rain-soaked concrete. She held her cup with both hands like it was something fragile, her fingers slightly shaking, eyes distant but soft. I knew that look. It was the one she wore when guilt wrestled with love, when her heart was somewhere between past and present. "He doesn't have anyone," she whispered, staring into her latte as if the phone might give her the answer she needed. "I can't just leave him like that." I didn't say anything right away, because I knew if I told her not to go, I'd be the selfish one. And if I let her go, I'd be the one bleeding in silence. She promised me something that night, a promise that sounded like forever. "Once he's better, once everything settles, we'll go public," she said. "I'll tell the world you're the one I love now." I smiled, pretending those words didn't sting with uncertainty. I nodded, pretending I believed them, because love, when it's real, often makes you a fool in the most beautiful and painful ways. I told her I'd wait, that I understood, that she was doing the right thing, but the truth was, part of me was already breaking. There's something cruel about watching the person you love walk away to take care of the one who once hurt them. It makes you question if love is supposed to be patient, or if it's just a test to see how much your heart can endure before it stops trusting. That night, after she left, I sat in my car for hours. The rain had started to fall again, tapping on the windshield like an impatient clock. I replayed our conversation over and over until the words lost their meaning. "It's just temporary," she'd said. But I'd heard that before, from people who promised to come back and never did. Still, I told myself she wasn't like them. She was different. She loved differently. Deeply, maybe even too deeply. I clung to that hope because it was all I had left, that, and the memory of her hand in mine when she swore she'd return. Days turned into weeks, and weeks blurred into months. Her messages grew shorter, her voice calls fewer. She said she was tired, that the hospital visits were long, that she couldn't always find time to talk. I understood, or at least I tried to. I told her I'd be patient, that I'd wait for her to finish what she needed to do. But patience feels different when it stretches into silence. It starts to rot inside you. Every unread message became a weight in my chest. Every "I'll call you later" became a question with no answer. And every night, I'd scroll through our old photos just to remind myself that what we had was real, that it wasn't just a temporary escape from her past. One evening, she sent me a photo. It was of her standing by a hospital window, sunlight spilling across her face. She looked peaceful, almost happy, and I wanted to be happy for her. I wanted to tell myself that she was healing, not just him, but herself. Yet somewhere deep down, jealousy whispered in my ear, not the loud, ugly kind, but the quiet, aching kind that asks, what if she's remembering what it felt like to love him? I tried to push that thought away, but it stayed. It lingered in my mind like a song stuck on repeat, haunting and relentless. I began writing unsent letters to her, little notes I'd never deliver. "I hope he gets better soon. I miss your laugh. I wish I could be the one you're taking care of." I'd write until dawn, then delete them all, because saying those things wouldn't change anything. She was where she needed to be, and I was where she left me, in between hope and heartbreak, holding on to a promise that had started to fade. Still, every morning, I'd wake up and check my phone. One message from her, even a simple "good morning," could make the world feel lighter again. But most days, the screen stayed dark. I told myself this was love, the kind that waits without resentment, that trusts even when it hurts. But as the days stretched on, I started to realize love shouldn't feel like waiting for a ghost. It shouldn't feel like standing at the edge of something beautiful that never fully lets you in. And yet, I couldn't let go, because she had promised. And promises, especially the ones wrapped in love, have a way of keeping you chained to memories that refuse to fade. The silence started to change her voice. I could hear it, even through the phone. The warmth that once melted through her words had become cautious, like she was afraid to feel too much. Every time she called, she sounded tired, not just physically, but emotionally, like she was carrying two hearts and couldn't decide which one to set down. "He's improving," she'd say softly. "He's finally eating again. He's talking more." And I'd force a smile, whispering, "That's good. I'm glad." But a small part of me would break each time, because I realized her world was orbiting around someone else again, someone she once swore she left behind. And even though I knew she wasn't cheating, it still felt like I was losing her, not to another man, but to a past that refused to die. I began to dread her messages, not because I didn't want to hear from her, but because I feared what they might hold. Every notification became a quiet storm inside me. Sometimes she'd text, "I can't talk tonight. He's not doing well," and I'd spend hours wondering if she was sitting beside his bed, holding his hand the way she once held mine. Other times she'd say, "He remembered our old song today," and I'd sit there, frozen, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. It wasn't jealousy, not in the ordinary sense. It was the ache of being second place to history, of loving someone whose heart was still half anchored to yesterday. There were moments I wanted to tell her to stop, to just walk away from him, from that life that kept pulling her back. But then I'd hear her voice, that soft tremor, when she talked about his condition, and I couldn't. I couldn't be the reason she felt guilty for doing something kind. I couldn't be the selfish one who told her to choose me over compassion. So I stayed quiet. I played the role of the understanding lover, the one who smiled even while his chest ached. I became the listener, the encourager, the person who reminded her to eat, to rest, to take care of herself. I gave her the space she needed, even when that space began to feel like a growing distance between us. Sometimes I'd scroll through her social media, even though she rarely posted. There was nothing about me, of course. She had promised to keep us private until the right time. But now, there were subtle glimpses of him. A photo of a hospital corridor, a cup of coffee sitting next to a man's hand, a caption about second chances, healing, or forgiveness. I try not to read too much into it, but the truth has a cruel way of speaking even through silence. I began to realize she wasn't just taking care of him physically. She was taking care of the version of herself that once loved him. Maybe she needed that closure, or maybe she still needed him in ways she couldn't admit. Either way, it wasn't my place to stop her. Nights became longer. I started writing again, not messages this time, but thoughts I couldn't say aloud. I filled pages with her name, with fragments of conversations that never happened. I'd imagine her coming back, telling me it was finally over, that she'd kept her promise, that we could finally be us without hiding. I imagine her walking into the cafe again, smiling like she used to, sitting across from me with that familiar light in her eyes. But every time I closed my eyes, the image faded into something else. Her standing by a hospital bed, his hand weakly clutching hers, her whispering words of comfort I'd never get to hear. And that's when I started to understand. Sometimes love doesn't lose in a moment of betrayal. Sometimes it just fades quietly, like sunlight slipping away at dusk. The last time we talked for more than a few minutes, she sounded distant. Not cold, just far away. "He's getting better," she said. "They think he might be discharged soon." I congratulated her, told her how proud I was. But inside I was terrified, because I knew what that meant. Once he was better, she'd have to make a choice. Between the man who had once broken her and the man who had stayed. Between the comfort of what was and the uncertainty of what could be. She promised she'd come back to me, that once it was all over, she'd make things right. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But I'd already started to learn that love built on waiting often teaches you more about endurance than happiness. After that call, she didn't reach out for a week. I tried not to panic. I told myself she was busy, that she needed time. But every night, I'd stare at my phone, my fingers hovering over her contact, wondering if sending one more message would make me seem desperate. And maybe I'd already become the version of myself I swore I wouldn't. The one who loved too quietly, too patiently, until he disappeared in the background of her story. But love, when it's real, doesn't demand recognition. It just hopes, even when it shouldn't. And so I waited for her call, her message, her promise. Anything that would remind me she still saw me the way she once did. The silence stretched on, and somewhere between midnight and morning, I realized that silence isn't always empty. Sometimes, it's full of answers you don't want to hear. When she finally called again, it was early morning. The kind of morning where the world still felt half asleep, and the sky couldn't decide whether to stay dark or start glowing. Her voice came through soft and hesitant, like a melody I'd almost forgotten. "He's home now," she said. "They discharged him yesterday." I didn't know what to say. Relief and dread collided in my chest like two waves crashing at once. Part of me wanted to celebrate that it was finally over, that she could come back, that maybe this was the start of us again. But another part of me knew the tone in her voice too well. It wasn't the tone of someone ready to come back. It was the tone of someone who'd changed. Someone who'd left a piece of themselves behind in a place they didn't expect to care about anymore. We met a few days later. She suggested the cafe, the same one where she had first told me about going to care for him. I got there early as always. I sat by the window, watching the slow dance of sunlight across the tables, tracing my thumb over the rim of my coffee cup. When she walked in, my heart forgot how to beat for a second. She looked different, softer somehow, but distant. Her hair was shorter, tied loosely behind her neck, and she wore a pale sweater that made her look fragile, like something the world had touched too many times. She smiled when she saw me, that familiar smile that used to undo me completely, but it didn't reach her eyes anymore. There was a quietness in her, a kind of calm that didn't belong to the girl I once knew. It was the kind of calm that comes after a storm, not peace, exactly, but acceptance. We talked like old friends pretending everything was normal. She told me stories about the hospital, how she'd learned to make him laugh again, how he'd started writing, how he said he wanted to live differently now. She said it all with such tenderness that I couldn't tell if it was gratitude or love that filled her voice. I nodded, smiled when appropriate, but inside I was falling apart in slow motion. Every word she spoke felt like a quiet goodbye she didn't know how to say yet. When the conversation faded, there was a long silence between us. She looked out the window, and for a second, her reflection met mine in the glass. That's when she whispered, almost too softly to hear, "I think I finally forgave him." I didn't know how to respond. Forgiveness. It sounded so noble, so right. But it also felt like a verdict, because in forgiving him, she had freed herself from the pain that once kept her close to me. I had been her safe place when she was broken, her comfort when her past haunted her. But now, she wasn't broken anymore, and I could see it, the lightness in her shoulders, the steadiness in her voice. She had healed, but healing had taken her further from me, not closer. That's the irony of love. Sometimes you love someone so much you help them become whole again, only to realize they no longer need you when they are. When we finally stepped outside, she reached for my hand. Her fingers were warm, but her grip was uncertain, like she was holding on to something she wasn't sure she should keep. "I meant what I said," she told me. "About us. I still want to tell people. I still want this to work." I nodded, but the truth was, her words felt rehearsed, like a promise she was trying to convince herself of. I wanted to believe her, but her eyes told a different story. They looked at me, but they didn't stay. They wandered, like she was thinking of somewhere else. Someone else. Maybe memories don't fade as easily as we hope. Maybe part of her was still sitting in that hospital room, whispering stories to her past. Over the next few weeks, we tried to rebuild what we had. We met a few times, texted again, shared small moments that almost felt normal. But there was a gap now, a quiet, invisible distance that neither of us could name. Sometimes she'd pause mid-conversation, lost in thought, and I could tell she was somewhere else entirely. Other times, she'd smile at me with an affection that felt more like gratitude than love. And maybe that was the truth of it. She wasn't with me because she needed me anymore. She was with me because she didn't know how to let go of someone who had stayed when everything else fell apart. One evening, as we sat together watching the city lights, she said, "It feels strange, doesn't it, being back?" I looked at her and wanted to ask, back to what? To me, or to the idea of us? But I didn't. Instead, I just said, "Yeah, It does. Because some questions don't need answers. They just hang in the air, heavy and understood. When she leaned her head on my shoulder, I closed my eyes and wished I could freeze the moment, even if it wasn't real anymore. Even if her heart was only half here. Because sometimes loving someone means accepting that they're already halfway gone. That night, when I walked her home, she hugged me longer than usual. Her voice was soft against my chest when she said, "Thank you for waiting." I wanted to tell her I'd wait forever, if it meant she'd stay. But something inside me knew forever wasn't part of her plan anymore. When she let go, she smiled, that same fragile smile from before. And for the first time, I realized that letting go might be the only way to let her be free, even if it meant losing her completely. Love doesn't always end with fights. Sometimes it just fades, like ink on old paper, like the echo of laughter in an empty room. That's how it began to feel between us. Not a sudden explosion, not a dramatic goodbye, just a slow, quiet unraveling of moments that once held meaning. We still saw each other, still texted, still pretended that everything was fine, but the silence between our words had grown heavier, thicker. It filled every pause, every half-smile, every "I'm okay." That didn't sound okay anymore. I could feel her slipping away, one conversation at a time. And the worst part was, she didn't even realize it. Sometimes when we met, she would talk about him. Not directly, but in the kind of casual, passing way people mention things they've been thinking about all day. "He's trying new hobbies now," she'd say. "He even started painting again." She said with a light laugh, one that didn't belong to me anymore. It wasn't malicious. It was innocent, honest. But it still cut deep, because I could see it in her eyes. That quiet admiration, that nostalgic affection that belonged to another life. I would smile and nod, pretending to listen, but inside I was unraveling thread by thread. Love is cruel in that way. It teaches you how to stay composed while your heart falls apart. I began to notice little things. The way she no longer leaned into me when she laughed. The way her messages arrived later, shorter, filled with fewer hearts and more punctuation. The way she stopped asking about my day, not out of neglect, but because her mind was somewhere else. I told myself it was temporary, that she was just adjusting, that things would find their rhythm again. But deep down I knew, when someone has already begun to let go, you can feel it, even in the way they breathe next to you. It's not loud or dramatic. It's quiet, like a fading echo of a song you both used to hum together. One night, I decided to tell her what I felt. We were sitting by the river, the city lights stretching across the water like broken stars. She was quiet, staring at her reflection. I watched her profile, the curve of her lips, the softness of her eyes. She looked peaceful, too peaceful. I took a deep breath and said, "Do you ever think we're forcing something that doesn't fit anymore?" She turned to me slowly, surprise flickering across her face. For a moment, I thought she'd deny it, laugh it off, tell me I was overthinking again. But she didn't. Instead, she lowered her gaze and whispered, "Sometimes, I don't know what I feel anymore." Those words hit harder than I expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. There was no anger in them, no blame, just exhaustion, the kind that comes from trying too hard to keep something alive that's already lost its heartbeat. She looked at me then, her eyes wet, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say more but couldn't. "I don't want to hurt you," she whispered. I smiled, though it felt more like surrender. "You're not," I said softly. "You're just being honest." And in that moment, I realized that love sometimes dies not from betrayal, but from time, from the quiet erosion of closeness that neither person knows how to stop. After that night, things didn't end immediately. We still talked, still saw each other once in a while, but it was different. Everything felt borrowed. Time, affection, even her smile. I started noticing the way she looked away when I said I missed her, the way her phone would light up mid-conversation, and she'd glance at it too quickly before turning it face down. I never asked who it was. I didn't need to. I'd already made peace with the answer I didn't want to hear. Because sometimes love doesn't need proof to know it's ending. You can feel it in your bones, in the way silence becomes more comfortable than conversation. I stopped trying to hold her hand first, stopped waiting for her goodnight texts, stopped hoping for the public promise she once swore would come true. I told myself it wasn't her fault. People change. Hearts heal in directions we can't predict. Maybe she had needed to go back to him not because she still loved him, but because she needed closure. And maybe in helping him heal, she'd unknowingly healed a part of herself that once loved me too. That's the cruel beauty of love. You never really know when the person beside you is quietly walking away in their mind. There were nights I'd lie awake, replaying every word she'd ever said, every time she'd smiled at me, every small thing that made us us. And I realized something. I wasn't angry, not even a little. I wasn't bitter or resentful. I was just tired of waiting for her to choose, tired of wondering where her heart was, tired of pretending that love alone could keep us from drifting apart. Because love isn't enough when one person is already gone in spirit. And I could see it in her, that quiet peace that comes from finally knowing what you want, even if it isn't the person sitting in front of you. So I stopped fighting. I stopped asking when she'd be ready to tell the world about us. Because deep down, I knew she already had her answer. She just hadn't said it out loud yet. And I was finally ready to let her go, not because I stopped loving her, but because I wanted her to stop feeling torn. Between him, between me, between past and present, between guilt and love. If my letting go meant she could finally be free, then maybe that was what love was always meant to be. Letting go isn't a moment. It's a process, a series of small, invisible decisions that you make every day until one morning. You wake up and realize you've stopped checking your phone, stopped waiting for a message, stopped expecting her name to appear on your screen. It doesn't happen all at once. It's slow, painful, and quiet, like untying a knot that's been part of you for so long you've forgotten where it ends and where you begin. That's how it was for me. I didn't wake up one day and decide to stop loving her. I just started choosing peace over pain. Little by little, I stopped chasing what was already walking away. The first thing I let go of was our cafe. The small corner table where she once told me about her ex, where she promised we'd go public when everything settled. For weeks after she drifted away, I'd still go there, order the same drink, sit in the same spot, hoping, foolishly, that somehow the air still remembered us. But over time, the place began to change. The sunlight fell differently. The smell of coffee felt hollow. Even the laughter from nearby tables sounded foreign, as if the world had moved on and forgotten that we had once existed there. One day, I finished my drink, left a tip, and walked out without looking back. It wasn't an act of defiance, just quiet acceptance. Some places don't belong to you anymore once the person who made them special is gone. Then, I stopped reading her messages again and again. I used to scroll through them at night, the old ones from when she was still mine. The good mornings, the I miss yous, the playful arguments, the future plans. They used to bring comfort, then pain, then numbness. I realized that rereading memories was like reopening a wound every night just to check if it still hurt, and it always did. So I deleted them, not out of anger, not to erase her, but to make room for silence, to let my heart breathe again without her echo inside it. Deleting her messages felt like erasing part of my history, but it also felt like reclaiming something I'd lost myself. She still reached out sometimes, her tone softened now, more distant. "How are you?" she'd ask. "Are you okay?" And I always answered politely, briefly. I could tell she was checking if I was angry, if I still hated her. But I didn't. I couldn't, because love doesn't always end with bitterness. Sometimes it ends with gratitude for what it was, for what it taught you, even for how it broke you. I had loved her deeply, fully, and honestly, and that was enough. It didn't matter that she couldn't stay. It didn't matter that she found her closure elsewhere. I had my own. It just looked different. It wasn't a door closing with a bang. It was a window slowly opening to a softer kind of light. I started noticing things again, things I hadn't paid attention to while waiting for her. The way the sky changed color just before dusk, the sound of rain tapping against my window, the smell of books when I walked into a store. I began to feel the world again, piece by piece. And I realized that heartbreak doesn't end when you stop missing someone. It ends when you start finding beauty again, without needing them to be part of it. That's when I knew I was healing. Not because I stopped loving her, but because I learned to love without needing her presence to justify it. Sometimes I'd see her name online or come across her profile by accident. She looked happy, lighter somehow, freer. There was a peace in her that hadn't been there before. And even though it hurt a little, it also made me smile. Because maybe that was the point of all of it. Maybe she needed to go back, to care for her ex, to heal the version of herself that had been broken there. Maybe she needed to find that peace before she could move forward. And if my love had been a bridge for her to cross that distance, then I was grateful to have been part of her journey, even if I wasn't the destination. I think about her sometimes, not with longing, but with tenderness. She'll always be a chapter one reads slowly, one I'll never regret. I still remember the way her laughter sounded against the noise of the world, the way her hand felt in mine, the way she looked at me when she said she'd come back. But those memories don't hurt anymore. They've softened, like old photographs fading at the edges. They don't burn. They just glow quietly, like reminders of love that existed once, beautifully and fully, even if it wasn't meant to last. Letting go isn't forgetting. It's remembering without falling apart. It's loving someone silently, from a distance, wishing them peace even when that peace doesn't include you. And that's what I did. I let her go, not because I stopped caring, but because I wanted her to stop feeling torn between the past and the present, between what she thought she owed and what her heart truly wanted. Maybe she found that balance. Maybe she didn't. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the answer. I was finally okay with not knowing. Healing doesn't look the way people describe it. It isn't dramatic or sudden. It doesn't come with a moment of clarity where everything makes sense. Healing is quieter. It happens in fragments, in tiny, unnoticeable shifts. One morning, you wake up and realize you didn't dream about them. One afternoon, you walk past a place that used to ache, and nothing inside you moves. One evening, you hear a song that once tore you apart, and instead of breaking, you smile. That's what it was like for me. My life didn't suddenly bloom after she left. It simply began to breathe again. Slowly, softly, like a wound learning to trust the air after being covered for too long. The first time I noticed a change was when I returned to the cafe. Not the same one we used to go to, but another one across town. It was smaller, quieter, filled with strangers who didn't know my story. I ordered my coffee, sat by the window, and realized I wasn't haunted by her absence anymore. For months, that emptiness had been my only companion. Now it felt like space, open, calm, and full of possibilities. The world hadn't changed. I had. Grief had stripped away the noise, the longing, the constant replaying of what if, and what remained was something purer. Peace. Not joy, not yet, but peace. And peace was enough. I began to rebuild my days. I filled the silence with books, music, and long walks instead of waiting for her messages. I started saying yes to things again. Friends, late-night drives, spontaneous plans I used to cancel just in case she called. My world began to widen, stretching beyond her shadow. But I won't pretend it was easy. Some nights still stung. There were still moments when I'd see something and think, she would have loved this. There were still songs that carried her voice in their echoes. But pain had changed shape. It no longer controlled me. It just reminded me that I had loved deeply, that I was capable of something real, even if it ended. One afternoon, months later, I ran into her by accident. It was in a bookstore. She was standing by the poetry section, tracing her fingers along the spine of a book. For a second, I froze. The world seemed to hold its breath. She turned, saw me, and smiled. The same smile I'd memorized 1,000 times, but softer now, older. There was no awkwardness, no bitterness, just recognition. "Hey," she said quietly. "Hey," I replied. We talked for a few minutes. Small talk, gentle, almost delicate. She told me she'd been busy with work, that things were better now. I told her I was doing fine too. And for the first time, it wasn't a lie. There was no heaviness in my chest. No hidden plea for her to stay. Just calm. She looked at me, searching for something in my eyes, maybe guilt, maybe regret, but all she found was peace. Before leaving, she said, "I'm glad you're okay." And I believe she meant it. I watched her walk away, this time without wishing she'd turn back. That night, I thought about how love changes form, how people you once couldn't imagine living without eventually become stories you tell yourself when you need to remember that love was once kind. She wasn't the villain in my story, and I wasn't hers. We were just two people who met at the wrong time, carrying wounds that needed healing in different directions. She went back to fix her past. I stayed to learn how to build a future. And somewhere between, we taught each other what love could look like: selfless, patient, and ultimately freeing. There's a strange kind of beauty in endings like ours. It's not cinematic or perfect. It doesn't come with closure neatly tied up in words or apologies. It's more like two rivers that once ran together, now flowing apart, but still leading to the same ocean. I used to think letting go meant losing someone completely, but now I see it differently. Letting go was loving her enough to stop holding her captive in my heart. It was allowing her memory to exist without pain attached to it. It was learning that love can still exist quietly, even after goodbye, not as something that binds, but as something that blesses. There are days I still think of her, but not with sadness. Sometimes I even whisper a silent thank you, because she taught me how to love with depth and how to let love go with grace. She showed me that sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on. It's releasing someone so they can stop feeling torn. And in doing so, I stop feeling torn too. That's the quiet gift heartbreak leaves behind: clarity. The understanding that not everything broken needs fixing. Some things are meant to end, so we can finally begin again. So now, when people ask me if I still think about her, I smile and say, sometimes, because she's no longer a wound, just a memory, soft, distant, and kind. And maybe that's what real healing is: not erasing love, but carrying it differently, not as weight, but as light. People talk about moving on like it's a race, like healing has a finish line, like one day you'll just wake up and never think about them again. But I don't think love ever disappears like that. It doesn't vanish. It just changes shape. It becomes something else, quieter, steadier, less desperate. It becomes part of you, woven into the spaces between who you were and who you're becoming. That's what she became to me. Not a ghost I was running from, but a memory I was learning to live with. Not an ache, but a lesson. Not a wound, but a scar that no longer hurt when I touched it. I started noticing how different I'd become. I laughed more easily. I stopped checking who viewed my posts. I began saying yes to plans without second-guessing whether she might suddenly want to see me that day. My life had started expanding again, not because I'd filled the emptiness with someone else, but because I'd stopped waiting for her to fill it. There's something powerful about realizing you're complete even after losing someone you thought you couldn't live without. It's not arrogance or apathy. It's freedom. It's understanding that love was never meant to confine you, even when it ends. I began to see her as part of my story, not the story itself. She was a chapter that taught me patience, the pages written in tenderness and silence. I learned that not every love is meant to last forever. Some are meant to awaken something in you, something that will guide you long after they're gone. From her, I learned that love isn't ownership. It's understanding. It's being able to wish someone happiness, even when you're not the reason for it anymore. And that realization softened me. It made me gentler, not just toward her, but toward everyone. Because once you've learned to love without holding on, you start seeing love everywhere. In moments, in people, in yourself. There was a day, months after our last encounter, when I finally posted something about love again. Not about her, not directly. It was a simple line I'd written late at night. Some people teach you how to hold on. Others teach you how to let go gracefully. I didn't tag her. I didn't need to. But the next morning, I noticed she liked it. Just that, a small, silent acknowledgement. And somehow, that felt like closure. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies. No long confessions. No teary reunions. Just quiet understanding. Shared across the distance that once hurt so much. Sometimes, peace looks exactly like that. Two people who once loved deeply, now simply wishing each other well from afar. There were still moments when I thought about how things might have been if timing had been kinder to us. Maybe if she hadn't gone back. Maybe if I had asked her to stay. Maybe if love didn't require so much patience, we could have survived. But every time my mind wandered down that road, I remind myself that love isn't measured by how long it lasts. It's measured by what it gives. And she gave me something real, even if it didn't last forever. She gave me growth. She gave me a version of myself I didn't know I could be: softer, more patient, more human. Love changes you, even when it ends. Especially when it ends. It breaks you open in places that were once closed, forces you to face parts of yourself you've ignored. It teaches you how to be alone without being lonely. It teaches you that endings aren't punishments. They're just transformations disguised as loss. I used to think letting her go meant losing something irreplaceable. But now I know it meant finding something I'd forgotten myself. And maybe that's what love does best. It returns you to yourself, even after it takes everything else away. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that version of her who sat across from me in the cafe, nervous, hopeful, torn between duty and love. I hope she found peace. I hope she found the courage to forgive herself fully. I hope she no longer feels pulled in two directions. And I like to think that somewhere out there, she sometimes thinks of me too, not with sadness, but with gratitude, because we both did what we had to. She went back to heal a past that still needed her, and I let her go so she could. That's the kind of love no one writes songs about, the quiet, selfless kind. But maybe that's the truest kind there is. I used to think our story ended when she left, but now I see it differently. It didn't end, it evolved. It became something invisible, something that lives in the way I love now. Softer, slower, kinder. And maybe that's what love was always meant to do. Not to stay, but to teach. Not to bind, but to free. It's strange how silence can become comforting once you've made peace with it. There was a time when the quiet between messages, the empty spaces of my day, felt unbearable, like the world had stopped breathing. Now, that same quiet feels like freedom. It's not loneliness anymore, it's solitude. It's knowing that my peace no longer depends on someone else's presence or promises. It's realizing that love doesn't always have to end in togetherness to mean something. Some love stories end with closure. Others end with calm acceptance. And that's the kind I've learned to live with. I think about her less these days, but when I do, it's in small flashes. The way her laugh would light up a room, the softness in her eyes when she talked about things she cared about, the gentleness in her hands when she brushed her hair behind her ear. These memories no longer sting. They glow quietly, like old photographs. They remind me that for a while we had something rare, not perfect, not permanent, but real, and that's more than most people ever get. I used to mourn the loss of what could have been, but now I celebrate what was. Because some people come into your life not to stay, but to remind you that your heart still works, that you're capable of deep feeling, even if it hurts. Sometimes late at night, I wonder if she ever thinks about me, not out of longing, but out of kindness. Maybe she does when a certain song plays, or when she passes by a cafe that feels too familiar. Maybe she remembers me the way I remember her, softly, with a smile that carries no regret. I hope she's happy, truly happy. I hope the person she chose, the one she went back to care for, makes her feel safe and seen. Because in the end, that's all I ever wanted for her, peace. I promised myself that if letting her go meant she wouldn't feel torn anymore, then I would bear the ache of her absence. And I did. But what I didn't realize then was that by freeing her, I was freeing myself too. I've started writing again, not about her specifically, but about the kind of love that doesn't demand be returned. Words help me understand what my heart already knows, that love doesn't disappear. It transforms. It becomes art, reflection, wisdom. It becomes a quiet assurance that you once gave something beautiful to the world, and the world gave it back in lessons. The more I write, the more I see her story not as an ending, but as a beginning. The moment I started learning how to love without fear, how to let go without bitterness, how to stay soft even when life gets sharp. There are days when I walk past places we once went together. The streetlight where she waited for me on rainy evenings. The bridge where we watched the city flicker beneath us. The park bench where we sat in silence because words were never enough. These places used to feel heavy, like reminders of what I'd lost. But now, they feel like proof of what I once had. Proof that love was real, that we existed. And maybe that's all the closure I'll ever need, knowing that for a moment in time, two souls met, cared deeply, and changed each other in ways words will never fully explain. I think people misunderstand what forever means. We grow up thinking it's about time, about endless years spent together. But forever isn't measured in duration. It's measured in impact. Some people stay for a lifetime and change nothing. Others stay for a season and alter the entire rhythm of your heart. She was that for me. A brief forever. A love that didn't last long, but left a mark that time couldn't erase. I used to wish we had more, but now I see that what we had was enough. Maybe love isn't supposed to complete us. Maybe it's supposed to shape us, prepare us for who we're meant to become next. Now, when I look back, there's no anger, no resentment, just gratitude. Gratitude for the nights that broke me open, for the mornings that slowly stitched me back together, for the memories that taught me tenderness, and for the ending that taught me strength. I used to think she was the chapter one had to forget, but now I realize she was the one I had to remember, not to hold on, but to understand. Because every love, no matter how short or complicated, teaches you something about yourself. She taught me how to love fully and how to let go gracefully. She taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love is release. And so I live differently now. I no longer chase what's uncertain, nor do I cling to what's gone. I let things flow, come, and go as they must. I love gently, without fear of loss, because I've already learned that even endings can be beautiful. When I look back at our story, I don't see heartbreak anymore. I see growth, transformation, and quiet gratitude. She wanted to care for her ex, promised to go public later, and I let go. Now, she doesn't feel torn anymore, and neither do I, because love, in its purest form, isn't about holding someone close. It's about wishing them peace, even when that peace no longer includes you.